Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on tools and solutions for education systems to prevent school-related gender-based violence. I know in the last several days, many of us have been attending many conversations on violence against women and girls. This is a very important part of the conversation, the violence that takes place in schools. School-related gender-based violence is a human rights violation. And not only does it impede a student's ability to learn and thrive, it can stunt children. SRGBV has long-term impact on the emotional, physical, and psychosocial well-being of children and young people. The World Bank estimates that 11 trillion US dollars are lost in lifetime earnings due to this impact on children's learning and dropout caused by violence in schools. We know that children and young people who experience or even just witness violence are more prone to be victimized and use violence themselves. I think all of us are aware that children who witness domestic violence and intimate partner violence at home, those boys are much more likely to grow up to become perpetrators. Those girls are much more likely to grow up to become targets of violence themselves. This is not dissimilar in schools. Boys who are beaten, girls who are targets of violence in school, usually sexual violence, they also reenact those patterns further in their lives. Yet, education is potentially the most important lever to transform gender restrictive attitudes, behaviors, and practices. In all the fields I've worked in, whether it's ending child marriage, ending child labor, or any other harmful practice that impacts a child and her future, everyone talks about education as not just the silver bullet, perhaps the golden bullet. Because it is education that provides that vital space where children and young people of all genders are free to express themselves and are leaders in creating a safe and nurturing space for learning. Therefore, it is imperative that this one holy grail of the space that is supposed to be the safe space for a child truly does remain safe and is a space of nurture. Angrai has been a leader in accelerating efforts to end SRGBV. We are so proud to co-host the Global Working Group to End SRGBV with UNESCO, and together we have been at the forefront of advocacy with and through feminist networks. We have set global normative standards, such as the whole school minimum standards, and we have facilitated learning and knowledge exchanges, as we're trying to do in this webinar, to promote good practices, tools, and solutions. This webinar is part of our campaign to support the 16 days of activism to end gender-based violence. And we believe our critical role there is to highlight the importance of ending violence in schools. We are so grateful to our partners. We have over 100 members as part of our working group, and they come from all different sectors, including education, health, protection, and gender equality. We have a fabulous lineup of speakers today who represent these partner organizations and members of that working group. We are so grateful for the support we have had from USAID for Angai's work on SRGBV, including our country-level pilots in Zimbabwe and Sierra Leone, our many, many regional learning events, and feminist youth-led advocacy. Today, I am so excited to welcome Scott Cameron, Director of the Office for Sustainable Development at USAID, to offer opening remarks. Scott, over to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Antar. Good to see you again. And it's truly an honor to be here today. I have been following this work and for some time and work with a very dedicated team that has partnered with the Global Working Group for over 6 years. And it's just a pleasure to hear all the conversations and dialogue on the 16 Days campaign. Looking specifically at the work in school-related gender-based violence, globally, we know the numbers are staggering. Almost 250 million children experience bullying and other forms of school violence every year. And as Antara mentioned, not only the psychological well-being that is impacted, but it leads to severely lessened learning outcomes, which can have chronic problems throughout a person's life. And COVID-19 as well has also only exacerbated the problem with more kindergartners, elementary school students, and high school students being afraid to be at school. So events such as like today in the 16 Days campaign and strategies such as the recently published US Strategy for Gender Equity and Equality are critical to reinforce the needs to invest in and work together to combat obstacles and that prevent us from making lasting changes. So while this is a complex social problem, which is rooted in widely held gender norms and practices, which enables certain groups to have privileges of power while disadvantaging others on the basis of sex, sexuality, and gender identity, if we work together and we have evidence-based programming to address these issues and work together in a coordinated fashion, there is a solution. Interventions that promote nonviolent, positive discipline alternatives, support teacher-student relationships, and create safer school climates can contribute to reducing the risks to students, as well as address some of the poor academic performance, dropout, or mental health, physical health, and other problems. So it also, though, requires coordinated approaches across schools, across communities, across the donor community to help address these issues. And to turn specifically to some of the work that USAID has done, over the years we have learned a lot. Our work on addressing issues of school safety originated in the 2000s with our Safe Schools program, which developed a set of curricula for students, teachers, and communities on school-related gender-based violence prevention and response. More recently, USAID's education investments have focused on measurable improvements to learning outcomes and focused on developing analytical tools and generating evidence on how issues of safety impact academic performance, how violence in schools is generated in its processes and outcomes, and what actually works to prevent violence within different contexts. Later in today's discussion, we'll learn more about this application from my colleague based in Uganda, who will share some of the successes and challenges from SRGBV activities. Another recent example was USAID's recently published School-Related Gender-Based Violence Measurement Toolkit, which we're really excited to release because it's a result of over a decade of advocacy, programming, and research. And despite the growing awareness, which we've been talking about violence in the school setting, we have had no really standard measurement to assess the prevalence of school-related violence, which is information that is necessary to make the systemic changes required. So the toolkit is also provides a survey to measure all forms of SRGBV, specifically bullying, corporal punishment, and sexual violence. It will help us identify and measure the risk factors and drivers of SRGBV, such as gender attitudes, beliefs, school climate, teacher disciplinary practices. But I think most importantly, and it being in the business of developing programs to address issues, it provides us with an evidence-based way of designing programs to address the key issues we've already discussed, but also an evidence base for future work that we can share amongst ourselves and learn and improve. We'll share this link with the toolkit in the chat in this conversation, and will also be included in the resources at the end of today's event. But once again, I just wanted to thank you very much. We really are strong supporters of the work here and really welcome the conversation to come. Thank you very much.
Recording in progress.
Thank you so much, Todd, for that wonderful introduction. We are so pleased to have partnered with USAID and to have been part of your journey of refining and improving our approach to ending, first of all, understanding, articulating, and then ending violence in schools. I now hand over to Ali Nate.
Thank you, Antara. My name is Elena Malonde. Before I go any further, I'd like to open with a poem. The pain sent you into the dark. In your aching, you were alone. You cried yourself into pages, and in that silence, you were alone. But not now. Not anymore. Our pain mirrors yours, separate but the same. We suffered silently, but we can heal together. In solidarity, fighting the pain. It's hard to name what hurts. It's hard to use your words. But together the fear can't hold us. Together our healing comes first. Hi again, my name is Alinafe Malanje. I am a writer, creative poet, and young feminist, and I will be moderating today's conversation. I co-founded Warner Collective here in Malawi, where I'm based, and this is an arts collective, social enterprise that is a member of Transform Education. And I've been working with Angai to coordinate this year's 16 Days of Activism activities. Actually, the poet piece that I wrote for the 16 days. So I'm really honored to be moderating today's panel discussion, and I'm really excited to learn with you all. On today's panel, we have a number of trailblazing experts that are all doing great work in their respective areas. The organizations represented on this panel are USAID Uganda, UNICEF Sierra Leone, VVOB, Education International, and Girls Leading Change. The conversation today will be really dynamic. So I will be engaging the panel, but I'll also be engaging you as the audience through the Mentimeter. So before we get into the panel discussion, we'd like to ask you as the audience to answer this question. How have you addressed gender-based violence in your community? To answer this question, just follow the link in the chat and write your answers in the poll. If you can keep your answers to maybe one word or 2 words, as you answer, your answers will show up in real time on the screen, and I'll be able to read those out. So just follow the link in the chat. The question is, how have you addressed gender-based violence in your community? So you can see some answers coming up already. Awareness raising, advocacy, awareness again, the awareness is there twice. Making sure people know it. Again, that's awareness. Difficult conversations, parental voice, sensitization, listening and referring, reporting to the police, and evidence generation. I like that term. Workshops in school, speaking up, training. I love that it's getting bigger. It's good to know that there are a lot of different tools that we're all using. Again, yes, parental voice, stakeholders dialogue, which is, I guess, what we're doing here today as well. Arts-based group work, community engagement. So awareness raising seems to be the biggest one. So just making sure that people know about GBV, which I guess is always the first step. Sports, Girls for Change conference. Positive parenting. Local-based research. Training on SRGBV. Okay, so yes, there's a lot, and it's really good to see that everyone is using different tools in their communities, and I like that awareness is the biggest one there, because I think that is always the first step, to make sure that everyone knows what GBV is. So thank you all for your answers. You can also just keep answering as the discussion goes along. So now to move on to our panel discussion. The first question is going to be for Aster Gabriel. Aster is an education specialist from UNICEF Sierra Leone. She has over 11 years of experience in UNICEF, and she joined UNICEF Sierra Leone in October 2020 to lead the system strengthening component of the education program. So welcome, Esther. Esther, my question for you is, what is a whole approach? And perhaps you could reference your work on piloting the whole school minimum standards that you're working on in Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Alina, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here today, joining the very brilliant panel members to discuss on SRGBV work that we are doing in Sierra Leone. SRGBV is close to my heart, so it's not only a job, it's preventing SRGBV is also a personal point for me, so I'm very, very happy. To answer your question, Alina, I will start with first maybe to say that SRGBV is a very comprehensive and multidimensional measure, and it seeks multidimensional and a mixed strategy to respond to it. So as you see the responses from the audience, there are diverse tools you have to use to address SRGBV in schools due to its complex nature. So the whole school approach is an approach to address SRGBV issues at school, at community, and institution level. The approach recognizes that SRGBV is multidimensional nature, and then it seeks to address the key drivers and the root causes through a mixed strategy at individual and structural and institutional level. So recognizing that the global working group to ending SRGBV came up with a minimum standards which have a framework to monitor and track progress around the 8 domains of this whole school approach. So our pilot in Sierra Leone is particularly working at implementing whole school approach and also tracking the 8 domains, the minimum standards through the 8 domains, how and then generating evidence to influence policy. So I will briefly take you through the pilot. So I will not go through the minimum standards as you see them on screen. They are categorized under 8 domains, and these are, I think, somehow captured on the Mentimeter response. One of each falls under these domains. So focusing in implementing the whole school approach in Sierra Leone, we targeted 18 schools in 3 districts, and we wanted to monitor progress against the minimum standards. And then by monitoring the progresses, we wanted also to document which standards are more effective or which standards are yielding better results in ending violence or in preventing violence in these schools. So we partnered under the leadership of the ministry. We partnered with 2 NGOs, one international, one national, and one learning partner, which is an institute, ODI, Overseas Development Institute, who is helping or accompanying those 2 NGOs implementing in these 3 districts and documenting, and also having an in-depth kind of research to understand what are the manifestations of SRGBV in school in this area, and then what are the key drivers and what is working in those schools areas. So this is how we approached it. As you can see on the screen, we had a three-way approach. One is implementing on the ground, the other one is evidence generation, adapting programming to policy advocacy, and then also establishing a coordination and information sharing platform for all SRGBV actors in the country. In Sierra Leone, SRGBV is a huge issue, so there are various civil society organizations, government, NGOs, doing a lot of things in the ground, but we wanted some coordination. So these are the 3 things that we are doing. And the research, so as I mentioned, the ODI accompanies the 2 partners in the field and have documented some lessons, and they are adapting their programming also to see which one is more effective. Through that, they have also undertaken an in-depth analysis of the situation on the ground. So the manifestation is really common punishment, sexual relations with teachers, girls having sexual relations with teachers, verbal and physical abuse, like boys touching girls, teachers demanding money for labor. So one particular issue is early on, many of teachers, like around 40% of teachers, are volunteer teachers and not really getting paid full salary. So they take advantage of this status and abuse children in getting them to work for them, either at the household level or at the farm, and exploiting those teachers or students, or maybe asking for money, demanding money. In some instances, we have also girls facing challenges like engaging in relationship for the exchange of food, money, or like in some instances for grade, for points. So it's really pervasive situation in Sierra Leone. And in some cases, also teachers insult and humiliate students. So there are very diverse forms of manifestation of SRGBV. Okay, then the key drivers are also in line to what you see. Some are due to poverty issues, some is a power relationship, and then there's a lack of accountability. Next slide, please. So according to this finding, the key emerging issue is that the need to strengthening the school leadership and accountability, meaningful training, teacher on code of conduct, and alternative positive disciplining, because corporal punishment also a huge issue in schools, strengthening coordination and monitoring, and reporting and referral mechanisms in school and around school, engage parents, community leaders, and reporting mechanisms and positive discipline, engaging men and boys, investing in basic infrastructure and toilets. Next slide, please. So we have a huge opportunity to make changes in Sierra Leone. So, and there are facilitating factors achievement ongoing. Currently, there is a very high political will and interest to ending school-related gender-based violence in Sierra Leone. There's a recognition that SRGBV is a national, GBV in general, but SRGBV also in particular is a national emergency. There is a greater intersectoral collaboration between child protection and education actors, which is leading to creating a bigger momentum to bring all actors together and have a coordinated effort. And then this is a very opportune time in Sierra Leone. We are undertaking a lot of policy and strategy development. So we are positioned well to provide evidence to influence those policies. So the education sector plan is under development, national out-of-school strategies under development, radical policy. So all these policies, frameworks, that are creating an enabling environment for us to really make an impact into this policy work currently. And lastly, there's a huge call for effective coordination around this work. So there is a need to scale up the pilots and strengthen the education system to prevent SRGBV holistically. So in a nutshell, this is whole school approach for me, and that's what we do in terms of addressing the issues in the pilot program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther. That was really insightful, and it was also, I really like how you mentioned a multidimensional strategy, and it's good to see that the Mentimeter responses also spoke to your research. So thank you again. The next question is for Melissa. Melissa Chipili is the Deputy Director at the Office of Education, Youth, and Child Development in USAID Uganda. She has worked for both the US Peace Corps and USAID in program development and management, and administration and strategic planning for development programs. So welcome, Melissa. My question for you is, how did SRGBV activities in Uganda involve learners, teachers, and the community in reporting and preventing violence against children in schools? And what were some of the lessons that you learned from those interventions?
Thank you, Alanafe. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's truly an honor to be speaking with you today, and many thanks to the organizers and participants of this event. The prevalence of violence against children in schools in Uganda is notably high. In 2015, the Ugandan National Violence Against Children Survey indicated that more than 75% of 9 to 16-year-olds reported physical violence at school. And in a 2012 Ministry of Education survey, 78% of learners in grades 1 through 7 reported that they had experienced some form of sexual violence or assault in a school setting. USAID evaluation findings also indicate that violence in schools in Uganda, while high for both boys and girls, is differentiated by age and gender, highlighting deeply rooted gender inequities and unequal power balances. Second slide, please. In response to these findings, and in collaboration with the Ministry of Education and Sports and other partners, USAID Uganda's Literacy, Achievement, and Retention Activity, LARA, implemented by RTI, developed the Journeys program to reduce SRGBV and create safe learning environments as part of a nationwide government response. Journeys takes a holistic approach and addresses gender norms and power relations in both school and community settings to reduce violence against children in schools and to promote positive changes in gender norms within the community at large. The 3 Journeys handbooks engage participants in facilitated activities and reflective discussions. The program is designed to build social and emotional competencies of learners, train and support teachers on positive discipline and empathetic instructional approaches, and seek community members to support on GBV protection and responses. In Journey Schools, supported by USAID, Uganda Kids Unite clubs were established as the platform for the delivery of Journeys for Pupils modules. UKU clubs were mixed-age, co-ed student groups led by teachers trained in Journeys. Change agents were identified in each school and community and trained to lead and facilitate Journeys dialogues. Committees were also established in each community or village to help identify and manage cases of SRGBV. These committees brought together leaders from the school and community, including religious and opinion leaders, and community parasocial workers were available. Next slide, please. Through LARA, 2,869 schools received SRGBV programming. Over 40,000 teachers were trained in SRGBV, and over 300,000 community members participated in community dialogue meetings. As a result of the LARA activities, the Journeys for Pupils module has been mainstreamed in government-funded schools. And in October 2021, the Journeys program was approved for mainstreaming within the National Primary Teacher Training Curriculum as core course modules for teacher trainees. Teachers reported that Journeys had positive impacts on child protection reporting procedures, and learners were more aware of resources in the school and community. LARA was the first program in Uganda to take an SRGBV intervention to scale, and despite the successes I've mentioned, there were also many challenges. Some teachers viewed the Journeys activities as outside of their responsibilities since they were considered extracurricular. And community engagement was voluntary and reliant on the available time and interest of the community. We found that changing the social norms around gender and violence against children is complicated, and there are indications that it takes time for a large-scale program addressing these issues to take hold. Recommendations from USAID studies emphasize that a coordinated approach is needed, both across sectors and within the education sector at all levels, to implement and enforce laws and regulations prohibiting violence against children in schools. Unfortunately, the implementation time for our Journeys program through LARA was shortened due to COVID-19 related school closures, making it difficult to measure impact. However, we plan to continue implementing Journeys through our new integrated basic education and orphans and vulnerable child activity. Next slide, please. As Scott mentioned in his introductory remarks, earlier this year, USAID published the School-Related Gender-Based Violence Measurement Toolkit as a result of over a decade of advocacy, programming, and research. The toolkit was developed as part of a collaborative effort to advance knowledge, measurement, and programming to eliminate SRGBV worldwide, and incorporates many years of analytical work from a variety of partners. In fact, LARA piloted early assessments developed as part of this toolkit in Uganda. The toolkit is intended as a resource for researchers interested in understanding the prevalence and extent of SRGBV and in learning more about potential risks, factors, and drivers of SRGBV within the local context. While the toolkit is intended for global use, it has only been piloted twice in 2 different countries, Malawi and Uganda, and will require additional testing in different contexts. Users of the toolkit are encouraged to share their results to inform future use of the tools and to contribute to the evidence base for SRGBV. Links to other resources resulting from this research and investments are included here, as well as the journeys materials I outlined in the presentation. So thank you again for this opportunity, and we look forward to further discussions and collaboration.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It was really good to learn that USAID is working directly with people from the communities and identifying change agents from the region. Also good to hear that it was implemented in my country, Malawi. So the next question is for Meryl Lafi from VVOB. Meryl is the country program manager at VVOB. She started her career as a university teacher, after which she changed to the development sector to focus on education. And after several years as an education consultant in Colombia, Meryl joined VVOB. So thank you for being on the panel, Meryl. My question for you is, how can a focus on shifting knowledge, attitudes, and practices of teachers have an impact on safety and well-being in schools? And could you perhaps speak specifically to your work in Cambodia?
Yes. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share our experiences on working on improved gender equality and responsiveness in Cambodia. Yeah, we can move to the next slide. Thank you. First of all, why? Why would we work on that? Can you please click again? Yes. These two images, the first 2 images, show how deeply embedded the difference between men and women is in the Cambodian society. The upper left image is the Chabab Srai and Chabab Pro, which is an ancient document that describes how men and women should behave in society. And the image below that shows what a good Cambodian woman should do and be concerned or according to the Chabab Srai. And the differences between men and women, or equality between men and women, has improved a lot, which, for example, you can see by many more female officers in the Cambodian government, as well as female school leaders. But still, as you can see in this article, and if you click once more, you'll see another article, gender-based violence and inequality, both at the workplace and in schools, is still an issue. And that is why VWB decided to develop and implement the EU and Belgium co-funded Tiger project between 2017 and 2020. And I will tell you more about that. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. All right, so what was our objective? The main objective was to create a safe school environment where boys and girls can develop to their full potential. I think very much in line with what the other presenters also share. I think many of us go for this, but it's not easy to achieve it. Concretely, we did that by transforming the Teacher Education College and 40 primary and lower secondary schools in Battambang province into centers of excellence for gender responsiveness. And that's a big word, centers of excellence for gender responsiveness, and not easy to achieve. We did that by working on 3 different outputs, and you see those outputs on the left of this slide. And we started by developing an action guide. And that action guide was developed together with all the stakeholders that you see on the right. So we really went for a multi-tiered and holistic approach by including the community, the ministry, teachers, school leaders, school community, and local NGOs were all included in the action guide. And why did we start by developing an action guide? First of all, by operationalizing the different concepts, the different methodologies when it comes to gender responsive teaching, by contextualizing that together with the stakeholders, we create a strong foundation for the implementation phase. But secondly, by developing the action guide, that would also help scaling on the longer term. So we had a double goal there. Once the action guide was there and approved also by the government, we started implementing. And we did that through different forms of capacity development, focused on different stakeholders. First of all, the teachers who were trained in gender responsive pedagogy, and then the school leaders who learned how important their role is in creating a community in and around the school that facilitates gender responsiveness. And lastly, we also worked with the school committee to help them secure parents' involvement. And that actually also relates to the last output, which is outreach, sensitization, and communication, because as we all know, a gender responsive and safe school environment doesn't stop at the school borders. It's also outside of that. So based on our project, we reached out to the broader community, all the stakeholders that you see mentioned, but also the broader public. And for example, what we did actually exactly 1 year ago, during the 16 days of activism, we did an intense campaign where we showed also the results of our projects. And last, I think, interesting feature that I would like to mention about the project and how we implemented it is that we worked with local NGOs. So the first 20 schools were trained by VWG. So we did that together with NGOs. They learned during the process, and the second 20 schools were actually trained by the NGOs. In that way, we assured that there was the action guide, as well as local NGOs with the capacity to implement centers of excellence, and that again facilitated scaling, because in that way, based on the government's command, these NGOs could continue to implement centers of excellence when it comes to gender responsiveness. And of course, the question is, should they do that or not? Does it have any effect? Well, that's what my next slide is about. Did it have any impact, the Tiger Project? Yes, it did, and you can see it on this slide. And you see it on different levels. So first of all, knowledge and skills was clearly improved, but it also affected attitudes and beliefs. And these changed attitudes and beliefs transitioned into different instruction as compared to what the teachers did before. The different instruction helped create an environment in which, as you can see in the upper or in the lower two boxes, in a decrease of physical abuse, emotional abuse, and even sexual abuse in the school environment. So yes, overall, we think, and also the research shows that the Tiger Project has been impactful, and based on that, we conclude that a multi-stakeholder approach that focused on changing attitudes and beliefs of all the different stakeholders can make a difference in the school environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Meryl. I really love learning how holistic VWG's approach was by working directly with schools and teachers and the community. And that's something that we can all take something away from and implement in the way that we work. So thank you again. My next question is from Madeline Kennedy McFoy from Education International, the Global Federation for Teachers, Trade Unions, and Organizations. Madeline is the coordinator of the Research, Policy, and Advocacy Unit at Education International. So welcome, Madeline. My question for you is, we know that over the last 6 years, Education International's member organizations in Africa have been doing some important work on school-related gender-based violence, unions being membership organizations with hierarchical structures and located in a variety of contexts. Can you tell us what it took to get those EI member organizations to make this issue a top priority and to start taking concrete action to address it?
Great, thanks for the question, Alina. It's great to be in conversation with the speakers that went before, because they kind of really highlighted the importance of the role that teachers can play. We know that teachers can be both perpetrators and also victims of gender-based violence in and around schools. So actually they can play an important role in being part of the solution. So I would say that the first step for us as a global federation of teachers trade unions was really putting SRGBV front and center as a question of union business. It's a union issue. It's something that education unions should be making a priority. The next slide, please. And in order for them to do that, a mandate must be given from the membership. remember or know that unions are membership-based organizations, and they have democratic structures. Members are encouraged to make their voices heard, and the leadership is going to take action on the issues that members identify as priority issues. So that image there is just an image from an EI Congress, the last one we had in 2019, which is the highest decision-making body of Education International, where member organizations come and vote through resolutions on the issues they consider to be important. So I think the process, as you mentioned earlier, started about 6 years ago, where EI member organizations really started speaking up, saying, you know, we're doing work on the issue of violence in our context. We are aware of the problems. We are aware of the issues around some of our members being identified as perpetrators, and we really want to be able to focus on. So the first thing was to really build the will, political will from the ground up, from the membership right through up to the leadership level. So we adopted a series of resolutions that give our member organizations and EI at the global level the mandate to work on this. Next slide. Then I would say, the second slide, thank you. The second step on the journey after we've, demonstrated the political will, built a political mandate to work on the issue, is to create a space and break silence. I think some of the speakers have mentioned it before, the issue of gender-based violence, including when it takes place in the school. You know, the school setting is a microcosm of wider society, where there tends to be a deafening silence around violence issues. So the next step for us was really creating a space in unions where the members of teachers' unions, sorry, working from home, background noise that I have no control of, sorry about that. If we remember that the members of teachers' trade union, of education unions are teachers, so they're in the classroom. So it was really a process of creating a space for them to reflect the issues, for them, for SRGBV not to just be an acronym or some abstract thing that, oh, we know it's happening out there, but actually it's happening right here. It's happening in our classrooms, it's happening in our communities. And indeed, many teachers have experienced it themselves, or they've seen it when they were children going through education. So we created space through the program that we started in 2016, where teachers were able to exchange and speak with each other, really bring to life what this issue was, to think about it from an experiential perspective. And human beings, I think that's why you started off this event with a poem, right? Which tells a story. And we can be drawn in through hearing stories, because we can, stories resonate, and we can hear our own experiences and understand things a little better. So we created a space for education unions to have their members tell each other stories. And those stories weren't just, looking at the bad things that happened. Actually, also, what are some of the good things that we can do as teachers? How can we support our students, number one? How can we enforce more rigorously our codes of ethics, which we do have as a teaching profession, to ensure that everybody in the union knows what standards are that are expected, that we expect everybody to adhere to. Thirdly, next slide, please. I would say the third step on the journey after creating a mandate, after opening a space for telling stories, we find that union members, union leaders at the national level really take ownership of the issue. They take ownership of their responsibility to act. And way beyond the end of the program, if you just go online and type in SRGBV and pretty much any country, we started off with just 7 countries and 9 unions. And we're finding that member organizations right across the continent are continuing to work on this issue. They're working on it internally with their members, trying to provide support, learning, capacity development, so people understand concepts better, they understand better how to respond, they feel empowered to create clubs for young people in schools to have somewhere to go and speak about their experiences. They're also taking action externally, so reaching out to the community, speaking with ministries, providing guidance and investments where necessary, speaking with the media and through the media, and continuing to find resources to build on the learning and the programmatic work that they've been doing at the national level. So what it takes, I think, is a lot of political will. I think Asta was speaking about that earlier. It's the same within education unions. Consciousness raising, if you want to take what I was saying about stories earlier, and call it that, consciousness raising, and then ownership, which leads to action. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madeline. I could have listened about that all day. I really like how Education International paid special attention to storytelling and to violence. I'm an avid believer in the healing and revealing power of storytelling. So thank you. Our next question is for Bongiwe Maume. Bongiwe is from Girls Lead Change. She is a social activist and the co-founder of Girls. He is passionate about positioning education space as a platform and vehicle for social transformation. So welcome, Bongiwe. Can't see if you're on the.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you so much.
My question for you is just, could you speak a little bit about Circle Back and your experience developing resources for young people on gender and violence?
Well, once again, thank you, Alinafe. Very appreciative of the space and platform. Well, first of all, Girls Leading Change, which I'm a part of. Firstly, I'm a co-founding member of Girls Leading Change, and over and above that, I am a teacher in rural South Africa. So that's the sort of perspective that I'm coming from. Circle Back is a publication, right, from the Networks for Change, which is a transnational youth-led initiative, which basically over a 7-year period, research period, provided a space for young girls and women to reflect on and use their lived experiences and knowledge to address gender inequality and gender-based sexual violence. So through the Networks for Change, I'd say it's sort of a platform where we met as young women from South Africa and Canada, and we had just one common conversation that we felt we had as young people, as young Indigenous women, coming from rural parts of wherever it is in the world that we come from. And so from those conversations that we'd be having, the discussions we'd have amongst ourselves, with our peers, with our communities, with policymakers and influencers and the likes, we sort of relied very heavily on visual participatory methodologies, in that we used or reimagined activism or advocacy over and above, taking to the streets and protesting, which are useful tools as well. But we also felt that as young people, there are different things that we want to say, and as individuals, there's different ways in which we can express and articulate our thoughts and our experiences, as well as our stories. So we used media, craft, poetry, style films, we used photography, we used a vast variety of mediums in which, as young people, we were able to articulate our own experiences with gender inequality and sexual violence in our rural spaces, and once we've entered more urban spaces, if I should put it that way. I think the major part or the major takeaway from the Circle Back publication is sort of bringing together those stories that were shared, bringing together those experiences, and just putting them in one place where that knowledge is preserved in one neat package to be shared generations. So the themes that we're sharing through the publication is themes of transformation, themes of reflection, and themes of connection, where we are saying through our different voices and through our visual media, we're saying, this is what I would like to share, and connect to someone else's story, and use those stories to sort of bring about change and transformation, and more importantly, start the conversation in our rural communities. Because being a rural-raised young woman myself, we come from a community where gender-based violence, equality are issues that we are very mum on. So as young people, we needed to come up with new innovative ways to communicate amongst ourselves, our frustrations, our ideas that we have for taking our community forward and reimagining, our interactions in rural communities in Africa, so that that translates within the education space. Like I like it when Madeline says, our schools are microcosms of our communities. So we felt that that relationship between the two, being able to interact with the community in order to influence some kind of change in schools and vice versa, is a powerful tool to use for social change. So that's in a neat bow what Circleback is. But I also want to highlight the Networks for Change has obviously sort of come to a halt with its groundwork, but through the Networks for Change, so many advocates and social activists were born. Groups like the Girls Leading Change, Sisters Rising in Canada, Young Indigenous Women's Utopia, Young Girls Leading Change, Leaders for Young Women's Success, Social Ills Fighters, and many others. Many of us became teachers, many of us became knowledge creators, etc., etc. So the work continues, and obviously there's a collaborative effort. We feel that one drawing, one craft work, one painting, one poem at a time, we are sort of adding to the conversation and paving the way to a deeper discussion where we can interrogate issues of morality, sexuality, gender, and navigate the politics of that within our societies. Well, lastly, where can you find it? You can find the book, which is available as a book in written form with all the crafts and all of that you can read there. And it's also available in audio version as a podcast. You can find it on the Networks for Change and Wellbeing website. I've shared the website there. I can also share it in the chat if that's something that would be helpful. The podcast is also available on YouTube as well as. I'll stop there, Alinafe.
Thank you, Bongiwe. I really like how your presentation spoke to Madeline's as well about storytelling, and I think I really relate to that as a storyteller myself. They say in the feminist movement you have the women who riot and the women who write, and both need each other. So I really, I love your whole presentation. I'll definitely be checking that out. And thank you everyone for your answers. I have learned a lot just from hearing you speak, and it honestly means a lot to me to be able to have discussions like this with people that have been in this space a lot longer than me. So on behalf of the SRGBV working group, thank you all. I'd like to hand over to Sujatha, who is going to lead you all into a Q&A session.
Thank you, Alinafe, and thank you to all the presenters. It really, for me, highlighted the essence of this work, which is collective action, and how we need the systems to be working at the level of political will, at the level of communities, with teachers, within unions, organizations that actually drive teacher development, and also with parents and students, young people themselves. So amazing. So we'll dive into the questions now. We already have a few, and please keep them coming. Our panelists are eager to share more about their work. So the first question is for Esther, who spoke about political will as being a critical enabler for this work to happen. And the question is, how did that happen? Was there a specific advocacy campaign, or did you use data? And are there any lessons that you could share for other communities? And then I'm going to just ask the questions and then ask others to respond. A question from Melissa about Lara and the Journeys program, and whether there is a next phase planned or an integration of the lessons into other USAID programs. And lastly, for Meryl, how did you measure the attitudes and behaviors that you mentioned that changed and the violence reduced? So what were the kind of tools that you used for measuring the attitudes and behaviors? So over to Esther, Melissa, and Meryl.
Thank you, Sujata, and thank you, colleagues, for asking this pertinent question. Yes, there is a political will in Sierra Leone, and how did that happen? In the past few years, I think I could say after Ebola, there was extensive work done around campaigning against SRGBV and GBV. Why at that time, when school closed for over 9 months, during that time, many girls will, get pregnant, and then they could not get back to school. And the lift also banning girls who are pregnant or who have babies. So civil society and community organization campaign to urge government and international organization campaigning, and a lot of advocacy had happened. There are a couple of interventions like the girls action. So we call it GATES project. There were a GATES project supported by DFID to support this kind of work in schools. And then there were a lot of evidence, as you rightly mentioned. There was evidence. The evidence spoke. For example, mixed data shows 60% of 15 to 24% to 15 to 24 years old girls have experienced any form of violence in their life. This has been consistently happening in different forms. And recently also we conducted out of school studies where we found out many of the girls are dropping school due to school so the evidence spoke, and the government minister who is respected, and he helps drive policy change. The earlier this year, one of the main papers is safe schools. So that's really shown in this country. And recently now they are also launching a new policy development on comprehensive school safety. We had a chance to also input on the revision of the national GBV referral protocol. So the evidence advocacy from all directions are allowed to have this political will to be there. And in fact, in the recently held UN General Assembly, the Sierra Leone president made a commitment to end violence in Sierra Leone. So there is huge movement going on. I think this is it from my side. If there's any other question. Thank you.
Melissa, if you want to come in next.
Yes, yeah, thanks, Sujata, and thank you for the question on how we plan to carry journeys forward through our new activity. Our new activity is called the Integrated Youth and Child Development Activity, and it's a combination of our basic education activities and work we're doing also with orphans and vulnerable children. It began last August. Unfortunately, in the midst of a total school closure here and other lockdowns, travel restrictions, etc., because of COVID-19, unfortunately, and Uganda has had partial or total school closure for 86 weeks. So we haven't had much in classroom activities. Unfortunately, our school-based activities have really suffered. That being said, we did pivot to home-based learning study groups under our new activity, and we did attempt to incorporate gender-based violence awareness in those by orienting the teachers that were leading those groups, and as well as providing them a register to track and refer GBV cases that happen to children in the study group's home and community. So that's been going on as much as possible during the periods when we've been hosting the home-based learning groups. Moving forward, we hope schools will fully reopen in January, and so we're now pivoting to prepare for that school reopening and identifying teacher patrons, school change agents, community change agents, based on, of course, the Journeys approach I described, engaging these three sort of key sets of stakeholders in the Journeys activities, in the Journeys program, and preparing and training those community and school actors to implement Journeys once schools reopen. We do hope to learn from some of the challenges we faced under the LARA Journeys implementation, and adjust to those in our new activities. One thing that we're also concerned about is as schools reopen and we potentially are looking at a condensed school curriculum. As I mentioned in my presentation, Journeys is a co-curricular or extracurricular activity. So we'll be, I think, working with ministry, working with schools, working with teachers to see when and how those activities can continue, whether or not extracurricular activities are allowed. So lots of challenges, but of course we really believe in the Journeys approach, and we plan on carrying it forward and hopefully strengthening it under our new activity and learning more and doing better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa. Meru, over to you for the last question.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you also for this question. I think it's a very relevant question to ask how we actually measure, because you should only scale a project that has impact, and then your research needs to be correct. Otherwise, you still don't know whether you have impact. It's on the one hand, it is how do we measure the beliefs and attitudes change. First of all, I admit I'm not the researcher myself, so I'm going to try to give a good answer. But if the person who asked this question wants to know all the details, I'm happy to connect you to our researcher at our head office. But what we did, we have special beliefs and attitudes questionnaires in which before and after you measure how people look at things. So for example, you ask a teacher, do you think it is normal when a boy and a girl hold hands at the school or not? Is that allowed? Or for example, is it normal that you ask a boy to clean up after class? And so you ask specifically about their beliefs, and there we see a switch in their beliefs in what is normal and what is not. So that is a way to measure attitudes and beliefs and a change. And then for behavior, what we did is we asked beforehand and afterwards to the children, the students, whether or not they had experienced or witnessed certain things. So gender-based violence kind of actions. We asked that beforehand and we asked that afterwards. And there we saw a decrease of the reporting of how much they had seen that. And that is actually interesting, because what you sometimes see is when you ask before and then you provide a training or awareness training and you ask afterwards, you might actually see an increase. And then you're like, an increase, but I try to decrease it. It increases because people are more aware, so they see things that they didn't see before. The fact that in this project, the measurement actually showed that there was a low report means that we can conclude that indeed there was a behavioral change and less prevalence of gender-based violence. I hope that is an answer to the question. Otherwise, again, I'm happy to connect you to our researcher who did this work.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you, for your responses. We have time for another round. And now we have a question for Bongiwe. Your experience is very powerful because you used, something in the non-formal education experience, the networks for change, in the formal education system as a teacher. So the person wants to know how you think we can bring this experience to scale from a non-formal to a formal system. Over to you, Bongiwe.
Thank you. Well, My response, I think I would tie it up into, I would say it would be a very multifaceted approach that I think would be effective, because I can tell you just off the bat as a teacher myself, that the first thing that you're going to get from a teacher, especially in a rural community, and I think this is true of teachers everywhere, is that the curriculum is loaded. Teacher's Day is loaded. So when you come in with something that is extracurricular and say, listen, let's talk about gender-based violence, let's talk about this and the other, as well as other social issues, it doesn't, it falls on deaf ears because there's no time to sort of address those issues. So I think one solution to that is one to first create political will on the part of our policymakers, curriculum development, because it's not so much a question of do they want to, it's do they want to, and are they actually putting in the groundwork to ensure that teachers free up some time, or issues such as social issues such as gender-based violence are included in the curriculum. Are we actively creating these spaces in our schools, in the classrooms? So that's the question, and that's where I think as advocates for these sort of issues, we need to apply the pressure. So that's one part of it, the policymakers, the curriculum developers. And then the other part is the pressure side, who's applying the pressure. So I think myself and many, many others who have interests in this area of our society sort of have a platform which they can step on and apply the pressure. Because as a teacher, it's a lot easier for myself as a teacher who has experienced, has gone to the workshops, has attended seminars, has spoken to, has experienced, has lived gender-based violence and other social ills. It's easier for me to say I am aware of this issue and I cannot be aware and mum about it. So from the inside of the education space, I can come in and say, listen, as a teacher, I want to hear more about this. I want to know how I can do better about this. So that applies pressure in a way that I think is unique to just teachers. Because, as researchers and others, you can apply pressure in those different ways, which is also another tool that can be used. But especially when it comes from within, when the teacher says, listen, I want to learn more about this issue, create a space for me within my workday, within the curriculum, where I can address my own biases, my own experiences, share my own story, and then learn the other person's story so that I can better perform my duty. As teachers, we're not just there teach X plus Y is equal to this, that, and the other. We're there wearing many hats. We're as social workers, as psychologists. And the reality is, especially in the South African education system, that we cannot readily afford specialists, psychologists, this, that, and the other, which could better serve our learners in our schools regarding those sort of issues. But we do perform in that capacity as well. So we need to be capacitated better. And I think the best way is to sort of continue with the research, fund the researchers, encourage, young people, young professionals in initial teacher training to sort of attend these workshops, attend these programs that enrich, your teacher, your practice as a teacher, so that once these teachers, initial teachers, enter the education space, they are richer for it, and the learners that are taught by these teachers are enriched within their learning experience. So I think it's a complex sort of problem to solve, but each stakeholder has a piece. And I hope that suffices.
Thank you, Bongiwe. Yes, amazing. And I'm so inspired right now. We are almost out of time with the Q&A, and I'm going to hand over to Alinafe to speak to us about amazing work that she's been leading, facilitating safe spaces for young people, solidarity circles, which we are calling them, during the 16 days of activism. And I suspect that we will continue to do that throughout our work on SRGBV. Alinafe, over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sujata, and thank you, everyone, for your questions and all the time. Okay, so I wanted to briefly about the solidarity circles. This year, for the 30th anniversary of the 60 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence, the SRGBV working group came up with the idea of having multiple solidarity around the world. And I have been working with Angai and the working group to facilitate. So what is a solidarity circle? Solidarity circles are informal gatherings that bring people together with the goal of collective care. They're safe and brave spaces that allow people the chance to be vulnerable. They're intentionally inclusive and bring together intersections of all identities. An ideal solidarity circle will have facilitator, support, and a maximum of 50 participants. The facilitator would use mindfulness tools to guide the participants to activities that allow for vulnerability and healing. And we've been working throughout the various transform education organizations to help them facilitate solidarity circles in their respective countries. And to assist them, we developed a facilitator guide. This is a tool that helps anyone who wants to create these spaces in their community. And my colleague should be putting a link to the guide in the chat. And we'd like to invite you all to download it and possibly hold your own solidarity circle in your areas. It helps students as well as feel comfortable and safe about issues of school-related gender-based violence. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce my colleague Sapphire, who is the creator of a youth-led initiative called Caribbean Feminist in Trinidad. She facilitated a solidarity circle in her area in Trinidad and will speak about her experience.
Hello, good day everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Sophia Alexander, as Alina would have mentioned, a young feminist activist from Trinidad and Tobago and the founder of Caribbean Feminist. I'm also here representing the United Nations Education Initiative through their Transform Education Coalition. I had the opportunity to host one of a series of solidarity circles for Angai as a part of the 16 Days of Activism. This was a moment for collective healing and community reflection, a safe space for us all to share our own experiences with SRGBV and to further propose solutions. Through this discussion, participants were able to reflect on what solidarity, healing, and collective care meant to them. Answers range from solidarity is mutual understanding between persons allowed into my space, to solidarity is when groups can come together to stand in and with each other in their. One of the most pivotal moments of the conversation when our participants were able to share on what they demanded from students and teachers to eliminate school-related gender-based violence. Some suggestions included the implementation of anonymous methods of reporting for SRGB students through online forms, and another suggestion was the provision of educational and training resources to aid them in identifying and supporting those experiencing SRGBT. This exercise really demonstrated that students are aware of the support gaps in their education and are ready to propose tangible. Additionally, the structure of the conversation allowed participants to freely express their thoughts and opinions. For young people, the opportunity to be seen and meaningfully heard can often be few and far between. That's why opportunities like this are so important. Participants provided us with so much positive feedback, reiterating the message that this was such a healing and necessary session. So I encourage you all to implement in where you are from. Thank you, Alina.
Thank you, Sapphire. And I also facilitated a circle in my area, and it was really healing and formative, I think, also for me. And in case I didn't mention earlier, Transform Education is a coalition of young feminist networks working to transform education, gender equality, advocacy, and solidarity. It was incubated by and discovered by UNGAI, and we have a method of organizing that is grounded in inclusive feminist spaces to encourage continuous impact towards our collective mission. So Sapphire is part of the Transform Education Network, and so am I. So again, we'd like to invite you to download the guide and all have a circle in your area. Finally, I'd like to say thank you to everyone. I think that's where I thank you for your time. Thank you for all that information. learned a lot, and I really love being a part of spaces like this. And thank you to the audience for all your questions as well. I'd like to hand over to Chris Castle with the of the section at UNESCO for some closing remarks.
Thank you very much. And again, I'm Chris Castle. I'm the chief of the section for health and education at UNESCO headquarters in Paris, and it's a great pleasure to be with you today. I've learned a lot from the discussion, and many of you may be familiar with my colleague Joanna Hera, who I know has been co-chairing and very active in the working group. So here we are at the end of, or close to the end of the 16 days of activism against women, against violence against women. And I feel a small but important sense of optimism in the face of the devastating statistics that we hear every year about the relentless scale and impact of gender-based violence. So hearing the examples that were presented today at least gave me a renewed sense of hope. And these experiences also show us that there's solutions, that progress is possible. At UNESCO, I'm sure I'm talking to the converted amongst the participants here. We strongly believe in the important contribution that education makes to addressing and preventing all forms of violence, and that includes gender-based violence. Schools and the learning process provide a unique opportunity to highlight and address the harmful social norms that lead to gender discrimination and violence, and we heard quite a lot about that today. There is increasing evidence from different regions that school-based interventions can be effective in changing beliefs and shifting harmful practices, and more generally, promoting overall safety and well-being. Today, we've heard about various approaches, components, the whole school approach to addressing SRGBV. At UNESCO, we sometimes also use the term whole education approach. And for us, that's because there's multiple efforts and interventions needed, and also because education extends beyond school gates. Therefore, I'm deeply encouraged to hear today various speakers about the different efforts being undertaken and supported in the different countries, all to try and shift attitudes, knowledge, and practices. Teachers in Cambodia, for example, or others in the community, hearing from the activists about the value of initiatives led by girls and young women themselves to highlight problems of gender-based violence and drive solutions. Again, that's been really inspiring, and it's been a great opportunity to have dialogue today. UNESCO is also contributing to efforts. Many of you will already perhaps be familiar with the Connect with Respect resource, which was developed with a range of partners initially for use in the Asia-Pacific region and now adapted and piloted in Southern Africa. Connect with Respect is a classroom program which addresses all forms of violence and bullying in school, but has an intentional gender focus to help address the particularly deep-rooted and stubborn forms of violence that we know are driven by gender norms. The results of the pilot have offered some encouraging findings. Over 90% of students participating in the program think that all schools should teach about respectful relationships. Over 3/4 have self-reported that their relationship skills improved as a result of the program. And the results also show teacher-learner relationships, student experiences of safety, and health-seeking behaviors. So these findings really do add to the evidence we believe about how we can deliver and support a broader whole education approach to gender-based violence and prevention education, which can have, as we know, a profound and long-lasting impact on student attitudes and behaviors. Of course, there are also challenges. Much like this we heard today, social change takes time. And teachers in particular need to be closely involved and supported if they're going to lead the charge to end violence. And through global research we've led at UNESCO this past year, we know that teachers have a strong sense of their responsibility, and I think Madeline also underscored that, for creating safe learning environments. At the same time, however, studies showed that many teachers don't really recognize some of the critical forms of violence. Some, unfortunately, may be perpetuating that violence themselves, and there's also a call from teachers around the world to be better prepared in how to respond to violence effectively. The work led by EI that Madeline described to mobilize teachers around this issue is a critical step forward. So to conclude, we strongly believe at UNESCO in the power of partnership and are committed to work alongside UNGUIDE to co-chair this important working group on SRGBV. I take this opportunity to thank all the partners for their continued work and commitment to this issue. We wish you a safe and happy holiday season and encourage you to enter 2022 with fresh enthusiasm and energy to continue this important work towards ensuring that schools are safe and happy places for all learners and are contributing to the efforts to end gender-based violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christopher. And thank you again, everyone. Thank you for all your participation. Thank you to the audience for paying attention. And feel free to log off whenever you are ready. With love and solidarity from me.